Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu ala Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to our lecture series. This is the last lecture for the Pioneering Imam series. We hope that you've enjoyed it. Just one last time, we want to acknowledge everybody that's worked on this year-long project. Nosheen Khan, Muhammad Ali, Kamran Islam, Umar Gardizi, Ayman Muhammad, Nasir Roshan, and of course, Imam Azeez. So for this particular lecture, we also consulted Brother Jared Ibrahim Long, who is a graduate of the Hartford Seminary and is currently working as a Muslim chaplain in Connecticut. And we also consulted with Sheikh Yahya Rodis, who is an instructor at Zaytuna College. Both of them recommended several books that we collectively researched, as well as they gave their own insight, which is what we will share with you tonight. You can find a work cited at the end of your packet for those of you who purchased one, and inshallah it can serve as a personal reading list. So while we're on the subject of the packets, can I see how many people actually purchased the packets? Just want to raise your hand. Okay, so a few of you did. All right, so just a few things. The packets are printed one-sided so you can take extra notes. There's a pretty extensive timeline on page 3. And that timeline, if you wanted to take a look at it, it will help guide you through the rest of the lecture. Also, as we proceed through this lecture, I would encourage you to please listen carefully as we talk about Imam Ghazali's life, his family, and his work, and write down that which resonates with you. If you are a father, notice the details about his father. If you are in education or in law, notice how Imam Ghazali approached his professional life. If you are a student, which we all are here, then I would encourage you to listen carefully when we talk about his instructions for the student. Jot down a few notes when you feel connected to what you've heard. This will help you to incorporate some of today's lecture into your life. Everybody good? All right. So thank you all for your attendance and support. So after my brief introduction, inshallah, Imam Azeez will present the heart of the lecture. So this first statement from Imam Ghazali is not in your packet, so I would encourage you to just listen. Whoever supposes that faith is realized through speculative theology, abstract proofs, or academic divisions is an innovator. On the contrary, faith is a light that God, the sublime and exalted, casts into the hearts of his servants with bounty and grace from his presence. Sometimes faith is evidenced internally and is impossible to express. Sometimes through a vision while asleep. Other times by witnessing the state of a pious man and receiving the emanation of his light as a result of his companionship and presence. And then there are times when faith comes by the concurrence of circumstance. Indeed, a Bedouin came to the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, denying and disavowing him. But when his eyes fell upon his radiant aspect, may God increase its dignity and nobility, he saw in it the light of prophethood and exclaimed, "By God, this is not the face of a liar." He then implored the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, to explain Islam, and he immediately embraced it. So light that is cast into the heart. How did that happen? Imam Ghazali was a master of the Islamic sciences, but it was after his mastery and the placement of these sciences in the prostration of God that the true experience of the knowledge began to unfold. The mastery of the outward is the key to the inward, where the heart is in a constant state of prostration. From the beginning of his pursuit of knowledge, Imam Ghazali was deeply interested in and engaged in the study of jurisprudence, theology, and philosophy. He always worked to get to the essence of the matter. He says, "The thirst for grasping the real meaning of things was indeed my habit and want from early years and in the prime of my life." The inner sciences were also always present in the backdrop of his life, through his guardian, his tutors, and his teachers. Before continuing further, I do want to draw a distinction between Sufism and Tasawwuf, however. Tasawwuf is the inward spiritual science that comes through the depth of understanding Islam. This is what Imam Ghazali experienced. Sufism, on the other hand, is not necessarily dependent on knowledge of Islam and can often be in subjugation of other than God. This can lead to a pseudo-spirituality of sorts, the efficacy of which is questionable. The knowledge of inner sciences that existed around him did influence his development and became more and more present in his life in the later years after he experienced his spiritual crisis. As we continue on, these points will become more clear, but before that, let's talk about some details about Imam Ghazali's life. So, does anybody have any questions thus far? No? So, this is where your packet starts. So first we're going to talk about his name. Okay. So his full name was Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn Muhammad Ghazali. His kunya or nickname was Abu Hamid. As is the case with many personal details about his life, there is also some obscurity around his name, the origin of his name. There are two main theses about the origins. The most likely is that it's based on the name of the town Ghazala, which is near Tus in the village, which is the village of his birth in Khorasan, Iran. It is said that one man took the name of this village and made it the most famous in the world. So the spelling we have Ghazali is the most common spelling in English. And for those who speak Arabic, there's no shadda on the za here. There is also a spelling that does have a shadda on the za. And if Gazali was in fact his name, it may indicate that his father was a spinner of yarn or cotton. Aside from the discussion around his name, Imam Ghazali has also been given many titles throughout history, which I will mention three. So these three are actually listed in your packet. The first one is Hujjat al-Islam, or a proof of this religion. One scholar comments upon this title and says, Imam Ghazali was a collector of the scattered parts of the sciences, surpassing in the traditional and the rational. He fought for the true religion with the charm of his utterance and defended the area of religion. His heart also enclosed a piety and a solitude in which his chosen companion was none other than obedience to God. He was also given the title of Zainuddin, which is translated as ornamentation of the religion. In other words, he contributed to making the deen beautiful. It has also been said that he was Sharaf al-A'imma, or the most honorable of imams. Some very bold statements have also been made regarding this imam and his work. I will share a few of these statements with you, but please understand that these statements of praise are common in the Arabic language and are just used to honor the person or body of work. The first statement: if there had been any prophet after Muhammad, it would have been Ghazali. This was said by the scholar Imam Suyuti. Another statement was that Imam Ghazali has also been described as a liminal figure, someone who stands at the threshold of the outward and the inward. And this is what the prophets did. This statement actually came through Sister Marianne Farina, a professor at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. How do we understand this statement? It means that he was grounded in Sharia and Haqiqah. He shares this with all the prophets. D.B. MacDonald, another Western scholar, also says about Ghazali that he was the greatest, certainly the most sympathetic figure in the history of Islam, and the only teacher of the after generations ever put by a Muslim on a level with the four great imams. So that last quote is actually in your packet. There are also several statements made in praise of his body of work. Dr. Olgar, a retired UC Berkeley professor of Near Eastern Studies, says about his book, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, that if all the rest of Islamic literature, other than of course the Quran and Hadith, were lost, then one would be able to gain a fairly accurate and comprehensive idea of Islam from a perusal of this book. This is some of the praise that Imam Ghazali has received throughout the ages. Everybody okay so far? Nothing to be repeated? No? Did you? Okay. Alright. So the next part is his biography. So if you all look at page 3 of your packet, there is a timeline. And this timeline was actually adapted from Dr. Olgar's short lecture on Imam Ghazali. You can add some details as I go over the outline, but when Imam Azeez is talking about Gazali in more detail, you can also reference back to this and add some additional points. So the dates here are reported both as Hijri and Common Era. He was born in Tus, Khorasan, which is in modern-day Iran, in the year 450 of the Hijri calendar, or 1058 of the Common Era. So Imam Ghazali was a Persian, and Persian was his first language. Something to definitely note. He also died in the same city in the year 505 of the Hijri calendar, which would be 1111 of the Common Era. He lived to be about 54 years old. And so just some highlights briefly. He was born in Tus. 3 years later, his brother Ahmad was born. Nizam al-Mulk and the college system of the Nizamiya played a significant role in his life, and the starting points of both Nizam al-Mulk's position as wazir and the Nizamiya are both listed. The beginning of his education and the names and death dates of his 2 well-known teachers are also listed. His spiritual crisis was in 1095 of the Common Era, which was very significant and led to years of journeying and reflection. In the end of his life's journey, he returned to Tus, where he passed away. So as we progress through tonight's lecture, please keep these details in mind. As far as his physical appearance, again, the personal details of Ghazali are not readily available, but we have this sketch up. This is one of the most commonly found sketches of Imam Ghazali. It said that in the actual description, it said that he was quite handsome. He kept a long beard. He was from Iran, so it may be safe to assume that he had a complexion and features similar to the Persian people: light skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. And so next, let's just look at his family. So Imam Ghazali was a great scholar, undoubtedly. And in the lives of the scholars, the focus in their biographies is usually around their learning and their travels and their legacy. However, in Imam Ghazali's case, this is even more so, to the point where it overshadows the details of his family life significantly. And one of his biographers actually says that his origins continue to remain obscure, but that the details may not be all that important. So what do we know about his family? In Ghazali's full name, we find the name of his father, Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali. And his father was a very respectable man who died when Ghazali was very young. However, he left sustenance for both his sons, Abu Hamid and Ahmed, to study under the local tutors. Some sources say that he specifically requested his neighbor to serve as a guardian to his children. And this neighbor was actually a practicing Sufi. Another source indicates that he specifically indicated which person would teach each subject to his sons. Another source gives a more detailed story about Imam Ghazali's father, and says that he actually spent a lot of time with the jurists. And while he was in the presence of these scholars, he would serve them tea and do his work, but that he was always in the continuous presence of their brilliance. In attending these gatherings of knowledge, he would pray to God that he also have a son who would have the same brilliance. When he was about to pass, he actually requested a friend to care for the education of his 2 sons. He left money for them. One of his own biggest regrets was that he never learned how to write. And Abu Hamid and Ahmed, both sons of this man, experienced the love of their father as he was devoted to their education upon his exit from this world. So, aside from this description of the father, the mother is not really mentioned all that much. Most sources indicate that Ghazali and his brother were raised by a friend or neighbor, but it's not clear if this person was a full guardian or a partial guardian. And one source did actually say that the 2 young boys were being raised by the mother. Does anybody have any questions about the father or mother, any details? Okay. All right. So next, his siblings. His most well-known sibling is Ahmed Ghazali, who is his brother, who was 3 years younger. The age difference between the 2 men, again, was 3 years, and Ahmed was a famous scholar in his own right. However, Dr. Olgar indicates that though Sufism influenced the upbringing and education of both men, it was more of a dominant primary element in the life of Ahmad, the younger brother, who could accurately be called a Sufi. And this is the distinction we made earlier about Sufism and Tasawwuf. In contrast to his brother, Sufism definitely influenced Abu Hamid's understanding of Islam, but by no means was a dominant current of his understanding. So it was indicated that Ahmad Ghazali can be described more accurately as a mystic, and Abu Hamid Ghazali can be described as a scholar. Both brothers did study in the village of Tus and at madrasa. Both had a relationship until Ghazali passed away, and it was actually his brother who narrated about his last day. As far as other siblings, he did have sisters, but there were no details available on his sisters. And as far as other relatives, he did have an uncle who was his namesake. This uncle may have been his father's uncle or his father's cousin. It's unclear. We know, however, that he was a prominent scholar and with probably a very strong connection with the greater intellectual community in the area. As far as his married life, Ghazali was married, but the name of his wife was not available. He had children. He had at least 2 sons, Abdul Rahman and Hamid, and both died actually during Ghazali's lifetime. He also had several daughters. So before we move to the main portion of the lecture, just one last topic, characteristics. So like many other scholars, Ghazali experienced hardships from a very young age. There are similarities that are drawn between his life and the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, as he was also orphaned at an early age. He was, of course, a child prodigy, having memorized the Quran at a young age. He was a voracious reader. He wanted to understand everything. For example, he didn't write any theology until he memorized 12,000 pages. He was extremely intelligent. He began to teach at a very young age, and at age 33, he was given the post of chief professor at the Nizamiya. He was methodical, scientifically rigorous, presented his arguments with logic and proof. He was very open-minded. Though he subscribed to the Ash'ari school and the Shafi madhab, he would also depart from these understandings significantly, especially in regards to his belief that salvation was available to everyone. He was also a critical thinker, a person who could easily see through to the reality of things. Having been exposed to the inner sciences throughout his life, he was a very reflective individual who heavily focused on inner sins and their removal. He was a self-critic and examined himself at all times and in all situations. This quality of being a self-critic is one that definitely stands out in the person of Ghazali. And 2 brief examples will illustrate this quality. Once, when he was traveling back to Tus, having completed some juridical studies, and he was carrying his legal thesis, his travel party was attacked by thieves who took his dissertation. The thief who took his dissertation actually laughed at him and said, "How can you claim to have knowledge when I have taken it and stripped you of it? You are now without any learning." After a while, he ordered the thief to return his bag. And after that, Ghazali said to himself, "The leader of the thieves turned into an oracle, whom God made to speak in order to guide me." The second event that illustrates his spiritual crisis. A man came to his teaching circle and said the following: "You have taken the role of guide, yet you yourself will not be guided. You preach, but you do not listen." Again, this particular comment also led him into several months of self-reflection and perceived illness until he finally decided to leave everything behind in search of the truth. So inshallah, Imam Azeez will continue the lecture.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is the last lecture in our series, the Pioneering Imams. It is interesting that there is no other educational series or a set of classes that I ever conducted over the past 10 years that I was so attached to spiritually, more than this one in particular, and I don't know why. I honestly don't. The lives of those scholars I've studied before extensively so many times, but this particular lecture series had left a lasting impact on me. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but I think I am the primary beneficiary of this series. So if nobody ever benefited from anything we've said, which I hope and pray it's not true, but even if that's the case, I would still stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and show my deepest gratitude for giving me a chance to be part of this and for putting this together. And I think we're all going to have a bit of a withdrawal period after this series is over, inshallah, to be taken care of by the month of Ramadan, which inshallah is coming very, very soon. But Imam Al-Ghazali, Hujjatul Islam, Abu Hamid Muhammad, radiallahu anhu, inspires us, I think, this time in a different way compared to the ways by which Imam Nu'man Abu Hanifa, or Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, or Malik ibn Anas, or Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Baqir, al-Sadiq radiallahu anhuma, Imam Hussein, and all those great people that had a huge impact on the Ummah. Abu Hamid inspires us in a bit of a different way this time. And I think he does because the defining quality of his life is a testament to his legacy and his career. Is something that gave a purpose for each and every one of us to actually be here tonight. If I asked anyone, why do you have to take time from your family and come to the masjid on a Friday night in order to learn about the lives of those great people? I think most of you would say, because I want to learn. It's a good educational experience, right? But that is what particularly and precisely defined the entire life of Imam Abu Hamid Ghazali, not just on a Friday night, every second of the day. And as it was our habit to select a defining quality around which the life of all of those scholars revolved, we decided to do the same with Imam Abu Hamid. It was not difficult. It is the opinion of the organizers of this class that the defining quality of Imam Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali is at-ta'allum. At-ta'allum and not at-ta'lim. And I will tell you the difference between those two in a second. At-ta'allum is a rigorous process of learning. Ta'lim is translated to English as education, right? Education is more of a process, right? It describes an abstract process without giving us enough information about the agency, about the actors that are participating in the educational process. At-ta'allum, on the other hand, is a reference to someone who's doing the learning, right? The life of Imam Abu Hamid Ghazali was one of two things, either learning or teaching. That's all he did. He either acquired knowledge or delivered knowledge. That's what his life. But what kind of knowledge and to what end and for what objective? Is learning a lot of chemistry or a lot of math or being a superstar in physics or even studying fiqh and seerah and hadith, are these endeavors ends in and of themselves? They're not. People study chemistry because they want to become professors of chemistry. People study math because they want to teach math and make a living. We study fiqh and hadith in order to possibly become better Muslims and please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and hopefully earn His Jannah, right? But for Imam Abu Hamid Ghazali, at-ta'allum had a very specific objective, and that is ma'rifatullah azza wa jalla. Knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you know Allah and His qualities and attributes and characteristics, when you know His dominion and power and influence, when you know His grace and generosity and love, when you know His wisdom and guidance, you eventually develop a specific relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is called love. you eventually love the Almighty. And if you love Allah, He will
Love you back.
He will love you back. He will love you in return. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved you, it doesn't matter what kind of prize He gives you, right? When you ask Allah only for Jannah, you're actually limiting yourself. But when your ultimate objective is the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sky is the limit. Well, I guess the universe is the limit. Or everything Allah created becomes the limit. You know, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, I quoted this before, when a group of people came to him, he said, Ya Imam, we keep asking Allah in our dua. And he says in the Quran, Ud'uni astajib lakum. Pray to me, I will answer your prayers. And we have been praying a lot, and Allah doesn't answer our prayers. You know what Imam Ja'far told him? He said, لِأَنَّكُمْ تَدْعُونَ مَنْ لَا تَعْرِفُونَ. Because you pray to someone you do not know. It's like stopping someone, a complete stranger, on the street and asking them to do you favors. In fact, every single one of us has a relative, or a couple of relatives, or a couple of acquaintances, or friends that only call you when they need something, right? And then you see him on the caller ID and like, he's going to ask for something, I know it. Last time he called was about a couple of years ago, and then answer, hello, assalamu alaikum, how are you? Can I ask you a favor? We feel bad about this, right? Because we think like, we have to build a relationship first before we start asking for a favor. Imagine if you go to a complete stranger and ask that person to do something for you. How would that person feel? Now, we do this with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. Completely neglect His presence, and then when we need something, we start making dua and praying so rigorously and asking Him to do things for us. But most of the time, He's out of our calculations. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't think that God feels angry at this. I just feel that He's a little bit disappointed. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually interested in loving us, because that's why He created us. Right? And when we don't love Him, I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is disappointed at us. And Sister Reem, I don't know if you guys were paying attention, I hope you were, but she quoted something at the beginning about ilm and the Imam's perspective on ilm, right? And he says that ilm is not acquired by arguments and theology and polemics and all kinds of things like that. Ilm is acquired when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showers His light in your heart. Right? So you work so hard to acquire knowledge, but it is that spark of light. That's when ilm becomes meaningful. And I want to remind you that you are here tonight for that purpose. And I want you to really refresh your intentions, refresh your niyyah. You are here tonight not to learn about Imam Abu Hamid Ghazali. You're here because you're hoping for the spark of light to be ignited in your hearts about loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? أن تعبد الله حق العبادة. Remember the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, ما في السماوات السبع من موضع شبر أو قدم أو كف إلا وفيه ملك قائم أو ملك راكع أو ملك ساجد. In the entire universe, in all of the seven heavens, there isn't a little spot that could occupy a palm or a foot or just a few inches that is not already occupied with an angel that is either in a state of dhikr, in a state of sujood, or a state of ruku'. فإذا كان يوم القيامة قالوا جميعا ربنا سبحانك ما عبدناك حق عبادك. When it's the day of judgment, all of those angels were involved full-time, 100% in the worship and the devotion to the Almighty. They all stand on the day of judgment and almost weep and say, Ya Allah, forgive us. Endless you are in your glory, for we have not offered you our most sincere devotion. We have not worshipped you properly. The angels will say that. Imagine what we are going to say when we stand before Allah. That is the purpose of ilm. To know Allah so that when you worship Him with love, with affection, so that your heart is overflowing with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It just becomes an absolutely natural process. So you are here tonight in order to know about Allah and to develop a relationship with Him and possibly to worship Him the way He should be worshipped. Now the Imam effectively, in very realistic terms, spent his entire life trying to chart a path through which he could attain that very notion. It's a path of ta'allum, but at the end what I want is ma'rifatullah azza wa jal. I need to know the object of my love. And he embarks upon those paths. He focuses initially, as I will demonstrate, on fiqh, on jurisprudence, on natural sciences, on the here and now, regulating human relations, rituals, acts of worship, what the physical body is supposed to do in this world. Gradually he realizes that that is important but is not enough. So he embarks upon a path of intellectual stimulation, working on falsafa and kalam, and making arguments about the existence of Allah independent of Scripture. How can we be sure of the existence of God without having to go to the Quran, independent of the Scriptures? Isn't that the purpose of ilm al-kalam? How to use philosophical arguments to stop and check those who are using philosophical arguments to attack the creed of Islam. An intellectual endeavor. So fiqh, and then aqidah and theology, and then he realizes that all of that is important but still not enough, so he spends a decade of his life on a third path that he charted for himself, seeking the spiritual satisfaction in the path of tasawwuf. And he comes to the ultimate realization at the end of his career, that it is not that tasawwuf is superior to intellectualism. It is not that jurisprudence is better than tasawwuf. It is that the only thing that can produce a balanced Muslim is all of them, practiced at the same time with the same rigor. It's a combination of the three. And that realization that made him the great Imam he was and will always be. We saw this ta'allum starting from the very, very early stages of his life, when, as I will talk to you inshallah later, his father writing in his will, who is going to teach my sons all of these different sciences? Whether they are physical and natural sciences, or spiritual, or fiqhi, or theological, it didn't matter. We need to learn them all. We will also see it being demonstrated in the Nizamiya school system that Sister Reem referred to, and the curriculum that that incredible educational system had to provide. We will see it in his teachers and students. We will see it demonstrated in his books as well, and most importantly at the very end of his life. You know, some scholars say that the last thing Imam Abu Hamid said before he says his shahada, I will share with you a little story that Ahmad, his brother, Ahmad Ghazali, shared, describing how the Imam passed away. But it says that he kissed his own shrouds and then laid down facing the Qibla and was basically waiting for the moment of his death, which happened a few seconds later. And then he says, طِيلَةَ عُمْرِي سَأَلْتُ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ الْعِلْمِ. My entire life, I asked Allah to give me ilm, to give me knowledge. وَلَيْتَنِي سَأَلْتُهُ التَّقْوَى. I wish I had asked him unwavering cognizance of his presence. I wish I had asked him to make me constantly aware of his role in my life. I wish I had asked him to give me the ability to be always, always conscious of his presence. And to take him as a focal point is taqwa. I mean, we can spend a couple of lectures talking about taqwa, right? That is the conclusion of this man's life. I asked Allah for ilm. I want all these things, but I wish I had spent more time asking Him for taqwa. It reminds me actually with Yusuf alayhi salam. What was the very last thing he said? Remember in Surah Yusuf towards the very end? فاطر السماوات والأرض أنت ولي في الدنيا والآخرة توفني مسلما وألحقني بالصالحين. Ya Allah, you are the one who created heavens and earth. You are my only helper and supporter in this life and the next. Tawaffani Musliman, cause me to die in a state of Islam. Cause me to die while I'm clinging to the deen. And he didn't say, and make me among the Salihin. Make me among the pious. It says, Al-Hiqni bis-Salihin. Make me possibly follow in the footsteps of the Salihin. Go to Jannah in their company. Because, Ya Allah, I don't know. I'm old. I'm at the end of my life. I'm not sure if I was among the Salihin or not. But what I am certain of is that your rahmah wasi'at kull shay. Your compassion and love enveloped everything, and there is possibly a place in your rahmah for a guy like me. I can't ask you to be salih, but at least I can ask you to admit me to your Jannah of the Salihin. You want to know about the life of a man, look at the conclusion and the summation of his life. Now, after this quick introduction, to just inspire you a little bit, to think a little bit further about what kind of scholar we're dealing with tonight, let me, inshallah ta'ala, talk about environment and upbringing. And the Imam, it could be said that his life went through 5 stages. The very first stage, all defined by ta'allum, by the way, all defined by rigorous learning. The very first stage started from 1058 until 1085, 58-85, easy to memorize. And started with Imam Ghazali growing up in the city of Tus, in present-day Iran, and basically being taught by his father. And when his father passed away, it is said that his father wrote in his will. Most of us, when we write our wills, what is the one thing everyone focuses on? Money, right? We always write about money in our will. And some of us write, okay, I want to be buried this way or buried in that place. Some minimal advice to children or spouse. But most of the will is always about how wealth is distributed. Now, in Muhammad Ghazali, who was the father of the younger Muhammad Jr., Abu Hamid, in his father's will, he obviously talked about money because he dedicated a budget for the education of his sons. That's very important. But most of the will, according to some scholars, was actually dedicated to who is going to teach them what. I got commitments from our neighbor so-and-so to teach them chemistry, and our neighbor so-and-so to teach them poetry, and our neighbor so-and-so to teach them Arabic, and that person at school who will teach them mathematics, and this will teach them fiqh, that will teach them tasawwuf, and so on and so forth. In his will. And then he appointed one of the most trusted neighbors and teachers, who was also, according to those narrations, was a Sufi. He appointed him to be the guardian and the custodian of the deliverance of this will. It is your job to make sure that these articles are taken care of. You can say no if you'd like, but if you say yes, you're bound by a covenant before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So he goes through this process for a number of years. In fact, they say up until he reached 15. When he ran out of money from the fund that his father had left him, and that's when he had to join the public school system. That's when he started to basically, he had to get into the system, and he was relying on tutors up until that point. And I want you to think about this. He was only 15. He was 15 years of age when he joined the school system. Prior to that, he was relying exclusively on tutoring. We have been led to believe, those of us who live in the modern age, we are led to believe that kids, once they're potty trained, and once they can say a couple of words, right? The first thing they need to do is send them to school, right? In fact, the age of admittance to schools is decreasing. Now, 3 years of age, you can go to preschool. You'll find lots of daycare centers that will take your kid as early as 6 months. This is crazy. Because it is a fallacy to think that only schools that are registered by governments and politicians are the only providers of knowledge. This is a fallacy. The modern human mind has been led to believe that there is no other way. And if someone does not go to school, it's a huge social taboo that we cannot accept anymore. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's an amazing video. I can share it with you. It talks about the educational system in Finland. How many of you know of Finland? Couple. How many of you have ever been to Finland? If I put the map of Europe, you probably won't be able to pinpoint where Finland is. But Finland, about 20 years ago, they had a failing educational system. Just a complete disaster. So the government, which has socialist leanings, basically brought some of the best minds, put them together in order to overhaul the educational system in Finland. Not the Netherlands, Finland. So they started developing these ideas. Number one, delay the age of admittance until 8. So you only go to school when you're 8 years old. Why? Because kids need to be kids. They need to spend time with their families. They need to be with mom. They need to just have fun and enjoy it. And if they would like to appoint or hire tutors, that's fine. Number two, they removed such thing as competitiveness. There's no competitiveness. You don't have to worry about who is the top of his class, and they completely did away with standardized testing. No such thing as standardized testing, all the way through college, right? But I think two more things that were the most extraordinary. Number one, they made it a requirement for people with a master's degree to be teachers. You have to have a master's degree if you were to be a teacher. And they upped the rate of pay to teachers so significantly in Finland that it has become one of the highest in the world, right? Not yet competing with doctors and attorneys, but still, really, really high compared to other Western countries. And then they created the idea of a personalized curriculum. So every teacher, there's a teacher-student ratio that by law can never be violated. So every teacher has like 10 students. And the teacher needs to develop curricula for every student based on their level. And it's not a stupidity issue. Like, it's not, oh, this kid is a little slow. It's not that. It is just that people need different stimulants in order to make them better students, right? A combination of biology, physics, and music will make this student really excel. And a combination of poetry, arts, and history will make this student really excel. So they would use psychology models in order to create personalized curricula for each group of students, or for every student, in order to ensure that that student is progressing based on his personal level. And today in the world, one student from Finland, when put in a similar test, all other factors being equal, when put in a similar test with any other student in the world, Finland comes number one. In any educational system on this earth, number one. I just thought I'd share that with you, so pick your brains a little bit, because this is a lecture about ilm and learning and education, right? So we might as well kind of tackle those conventional ideas on education that we have been fed at a very young age. You know what's, I'm not calling this, it's not a conspiracy. Okay, it's not. But you know what is a conspiracy? It's the healthcare system. Because we, again, it's the same thing. We are led to believe that the only legitimate providers of healing are doctors with medical degrees or accredited by states and governments. Humanity operated for thousands of years without medical degrees and achieved really great results. Insurance companies are sucking your blood dry, I'm telling you. You need to think twice before you pay those really high premiums to your insurance companies. An absolute waste of money. And then when you actually need them, they bill you. They bill the living lights out of you with all of these little things here and there, and then you end up really a lot poorer than you were. But anyway, don't quote me on that.
So you are against Obamacare?
Yes, but not because I support Republicans. But I'm against it on different grounds. But anyway. So this is the first stage of the Imam's life. And it continues up until the point where he was basically picked up by the Seljuks. You know the Seljuks? The Salajiqa? You know your history? The Seljuk dynasty ruled a big chunk of the Muslim world. And for the most part, they were just rulers. They were patrons of education and the arts and so forth. So he was picked up by Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam al-Mulk was the wazir. He was the main minister, so to speak, in the government under a really great Seljuk leader. His name was Alp Arslan. Heard of him before? Again, you need to go back to history books. I studied this stuff at school when I was like 7. Not to say that the Egyptian school system is better than the American. So that basically starts the second phase in the life of this Imam, where he is now teaching at the Nizamiya school system, particularly in Baghdad, and it had 9 campuses. I'll talk about this inshallah later. And I really would like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about Nizam al-Mulk, this really great man that was Ghazali's mentor, that hired him to be the teacher and later on the principal of the Nizamiya school system. And they call him Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam is the order of the government, basically, the order of the dominion. That was his title, Nizam al-Mulk. They also used to call him Qiwam al-Din. He is the springboard on which the deen rises. So when it comes to government and administration, he was a genius. When it comes to religious matters, he was a great scholar as well. His name is Al-Hasan ibn Ali. They call him Abu Ali Al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn Ishaq al-Tusi, also from Tus, Iran. He was the patron of Imam al-Ghazali. And he had hired one of the great teachers of Ghazali prior to that, Imam Al-Juwayn, inshallah, I'll talk about him later. But he basically believed in Imam Ghazali's abilities. He felt that this man has something different. He's destined for greatness, right? And he put his trust in him in an extremely incredible way, to the extent that he appointed him, as I said, to become a teacher at this madrasa system, and eventually became the principal. Nizam al-Mulk was Shafi'i by fiqh, and he was Ash'ari by aqidah. I will talk about that inshallah in a few minutes and what it means. Let me mention, while I'm talking about Nizam al-Mulk, what is the Nizamiya school? Nizam al-Mulk, Nizamiya, they call the school system after me. The Nizamiya school system was an incredible, pioneering school system that the Seljuks created with the advice of Nizam al-Mulk, in which they wanted to produce students and citizens that are balanced in all of the aspects of their lives. Remember when I said about the 3 paths that Imam Ghazali charted for himself? Nizamiya was trying to achieve the same thing. They were teaching kids fiqh and all the physical and the natural sciences. That's this world. They were teaching them aqidah, theology, and falsafa, philosophy, and ilm al-kalam, and so forth. That's the intellectualism. And then they were teaching them some Sufi teachings as well, right? In one school, trying to produce kids that will grow and become leaders of their communities, that have balanced minds and perspectives. But one of the really most incredible things about Nizamiya is that they allowed teaching other schools of thought that were not necessarily Ash'ari and were not necessarily Shafi'i. They taught Mu'tazili thought. They taught Ismaili and Ja'fari thought. They taught the Maturidi aqidah, and some of the Jahmis and the Murji'a theology as well, because their understanding was the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is light and nobody can put it out except Him. And it is only through rigorous debate and confrontation of ideas that the truth can come out, not by suppression, not by putting people in prison. At least that was Nizam al-Mulk's methodology, not necessarily all the Seljuks felt the same way. But it wasn't just Nizamiya that was the legacy of Nizam al-Mulk. I mean, he was basically building hospitals, he was renovating buildings. He had this eye for arts. Like in many parts of Khurasan, he would ensure that the buildings look the same, that they have some architectural quality that is unique to them, which is something that we actually implement today. He established endowments for health, for scholarships for the orphans, and so on and so forth. From a deen standpoint, they actually say that Nizam al-Mulk would never sit down before he makes wudu. Anytime he would sit down to eat or to with the guests to talk or to write or something, he would always make wudu first. Fasted on Mondays and Thursdays, and only wanted the company and the presence of righteous people. Unfortunately, he was assassinated by the Ismailis on his way to Mecca, and inshallah I'll talk about the Ismaili factor in the course of this lecture as well. But I want you to think of the notion that Nizam al-Mulk actually sponsored and mentored Abu Hamid Ghazali. Most of us are okay with sponsoring things. Like I can ask you to sponsor an event. Or we have those chairs, those seats that you're sitting on. We have them for sponsorship as well, by way of donating to the masjid. You can sponsor a seat. You can sponsor a program, educational program, possibly. People sponsor orphans, right? They sponsor classrooms. They sponsor projects and events, and so forth. But this man sponsored a human being. He invested in human resources. Wouldn't it be amazing if we have a scholarship fund to sponsor the academic aspirations of bright Muslim minds? Well, alhamdulillah, we've already established one here at Salam. And there is a good amount of money that was donated by some community members for the sake of that fund. And I invite you to really adjust our priorities a little bit and realize that it is in human beings that any investment or the best investment could materialize. Anything else is subject to all kinds of circumstances. The best investment we could ever make is in human beings. And I really wanted to take this opportunity to announce something that we have not made public before, but alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, with money that is coming from that fund and also money that is coming from other sources, we are helping 6 of the brightest students, inshallah ta'ala, who have plans to travel to Egypt early January and to study at Al-Azhar University and come back, inshallah, as great scholars. So that is there, and we've been working on this rigorously. I don't have their permission to disclose their names yet, but that is the idea. And if you would like to support this project, inshallah ta'ala, please let me know personally. Now, at that stage of Imam al-Ghazali's life, he basically authored most of his books on fiqh, and also some on logic and philosophy and so forth. The third stage is when the Imam went through the spiritual crisis. He went through a profound spiritual crisis that really changed everything for him. And that was a great turning point, as I will show inshallah in a few minutes. And in that period, I'm not going to talk about the details of the crisis because I will mention it later, but in that stage that took him about 10 years, he published or authored Ihya Ulumuddin. It was actually written at the stage when he was trying to find out who he is and what his place in the world is and which path would eventually lead him to the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He also wrote his incredible book, التبر المسبوك في نصيحة الملوك. What is tibr? Tibr is gold, right? What is masbuk? Molded into, those gold bricks, right? التبر المسبوك. The gold bricks in the council of the kings. Because he thought, I'm going through this spiritual experience and kings are known to pay so much attention to dunya. I need to share some advice with these guys. So he writes that in addition to Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of religious knowledge. Fourth stage, the Imam comes out of his crisis and he brings balance to his life. Now he knows what he needs to do. He goes back to Nishapur. By the way, Nishapur is a city in Iran. Arabs call it Nisabur. So just mention both so that if you're familiar with one, you can remember the other. So he goes back and there he writes his own autobiography, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the deliverer from error, which I think many of you probably have come across before. And the last stage of his life, he basically realizes that he's ailing, his moment is drawing near, and he decides to seclude himself again from public eye for a few months, and that's when he passed away. Okay, now livelihood. Inshallah, we'll take a break, by the way, when it's Maghrib time. We'll do prayer and come back. Livelihood of Imam Abu Hamid Ghazali can be summarized in 2 words, and that is father and government. Father and government. The early stage of his life, he was basically being sponsored by the fund, the scholarship fund that his father put together. But after that, Imam Abu Hamid Ghazali, who was both Ash'ari and Shafi'i, he was loved by the Seljuks. They loved him. They considered him to be the most influential and the most beautiful and the most honored and prestigious scholar of the time. Unlike every single Imam and scholar we've discussed in this series, Imam al-Ghazali never had a problem with the political establishment. Not because he wasn't an activist, but because the Seljuks were really, at least Nizam al-Mulk, with his dominion on Khorasan, he was really doing an incredible job. And you know, they were still like absolute monarchs, but they were not known for abuses the same way the Abbasis, for example, were known for. And because of his prestigious status as a great scholar and Imam, and his association with the Nizamiya school, and he was also responsible, by the way, kind of like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you know, Al-Awqaf system. He was responsible for the masajid and their architecture and their maintenance and so forth around the country. So he really had an incredible public position. He was appointed by the government, he was loved by everyone, so he actually made a lot of money. So as far as livelihood, again, came from his dad, but most of his life was coming from his money, even from the government. Even when he went on the spiritual journey, he had enough money to support his family for a decade. Money was never a question that they were worried about. All right. Now keep this in mind. He did not have a problem with the government. This will actually turn out to be relevant in a little bit. Turning point. There are 2 crises that took place in the Imam's life. And I, in many ways, think that there are, again, with every Imam we discuss, that there's always one turning point, right? The members of our team that helped me put this class together think that he has 2 turning points. And I disagreed with them about the nature of those turning points. We agreed on one, but we disagreed on the other. There is a crisis of intellectual nature that he went through, in which he started questioning the notion that you could use the senses, all of your 6 senses or your 5 senses. He questioned the notion that you can use the senses in order to find out about the natural world and make deductions and hypothesize from there, right? This is how science is conducted, right? Deductive science. So you use your senses, you observe the natural world, and you see patterns, and then you go back to your lab or your office and you start theorizing, and you start extrapolating, and saying, you know, this is how the weather is basically done or whatever. This is how the sun moves. This is how, because we observe, for example, elements like metals. They expand with heat and they contract with cold, whatever. So observing the natural world and extrapolating and theorizing from there, that's objective method. He started questioning that it was a mere intellectual crisis, and let me actually read what he himself in the Deliverer from Error said. At length, God Most High cured me of that sickness. It took him about 2 years. My soul regained its health and equilibrium. And once again, I accepted the self-evident data of reason, and I relied on them with safety and certainty. But that was not achieved by conducting a proof, by constructing a proof, or putting together an argument. Remember, that's what he said before as well. It wasn't achieved by constructing a proof or putting together an argument. On the contrary, it was the effect of a light which Allah Most High cast into my chest. And that light is the key to most knowledge. This idea, by the way, will repeat itself a couple of times in the course of this lecture. The second crisis, which all of us agree that that was a huge turning point for him, was a spiritual crisis. It was very deep, it was profound, it had a massive impact on him, it totally turned his life